It is not Friday. It is Saturday. I cheated because yesterday was December 25th and it was going so well family wise and day wise and all those things that one hopes for an enjoyable family holiday that I just looked at the computer and said, no, I just don't want to turn that thing on. I don't want to go and flip the switch and go check. It'll suck you in. You'll go to emails, you'll go to Discord, you'll go to all the places, and I didn't really want to do that. So I gave myself a little break and decided I would just show up late. So here I am, Friday Live on the next day. I suppose everybody has their various versions of what to do around this time of year. And my daughter, for our Christmas, gave me this coffee cup, which she made, actually, with little dragons and dice and stuff all over it, which I think is quite wonderful. It's been a good year for coffee cups. I have Adept Play coffee cups now, which are available for purchase if anybody would. So anyway, stuff like that. It's kind of cool. I like this thing. And as I say, the Christmas, which can be a dreadfully stressful and difficult time, I will always kind of be grateful in retrospect to Ozma, who, when the twins were very tiny and Jonathan tinier still, as Cecilia and I looked at each other and, gazed at each other, like, they're not going to remember Christmas. Do you want a Christmas? Do you want one? No. And we're kind of going, well, we don't really need one of those. And Ozma kind of gives us the eyeball. It says, these children get their Christmas. It's important. And so, cowed, we submitted and had a really, really nice Christmas that year of 2009. So I recall that nicely. And this was a similar one. It was the kids really stepped up and chose presents for each other. And it wasn't too big. We didn't have a huge sprawly Christmas with 80 things. And this was the first year, the second really, that I was able to go to the storage and get out the Christmas boxes and set things up. And we know that they'll go back into the boxes and back into the storage. This one was the second time that we did that in a sense of comfort that our stuff was where we wanted it to be and knew where it was. But it was really the first completely routine version of doing that. And it is a sad commentary on all the stages of life, that at this stage of life, the fact that you can set up Christmas and it is a routine act with all your stuff where you want it to be seems to be occasion for, joyousness in and of itself. So if you haven't arrived at that stage, that's what you have to look forward to. There you go. And if you have, then I can only hope that you are in the situation where you can, benefit, you can affirm this rather than descend into a pit of hell because you haven't. Okay, so anyway, that has proceeded nicely with plenty of, the repast, the Swedish repast of the hams and the herring and the prinskorv and the varieties of other things you have in gingerbread houses. All those things got made and made easily, even the Jonsson, and laid out and enough for leftovers, but not so much that we are swimming in it as for an army. And it, the kids all munched down the parts that they liked, and we had this Finnish, Jule schnapps, as well as a few other things, and we kind of looked at each other and said that was easy and fun. Remarkable, really. So I'm feeling good about that. And what else could be of Friday Live interest? Another thing is that I'm engaging with books quite a lot, which I always have all my life, but various stressful things this last year actually damped down my reading. And that's going to be amazing for anybody who's known me in the past, because damping down my reading is just not something I do. Well, I've been really busy with a few other kind of reading heavy things that pertain to role-playing games and their design and stuff, but really just blazing through my bookshelves at any time, all the time, is a way of life for me. And it brought up an author who's probably very familiar to a lot of people who are watching this, Gene Wolfe, whom I met a couple of times in Chicago. He would give talks or otherwise attend events and stuff like that. And he was a very kind of a great guy to say, hey, I really like your books. And you would find yourself in a cool conversation with him. He was good at it. And I typically don't go up and bother authors, even in places where you're supposed to go do it. But I went to one of his talks and there discovered, that he was very personable and, engaged with people. And so I did a little bit more at other events. Okay, so anyway, this book that I'm rereading at the moment is, I think, if not his last collection of short stories, toward the end of his writing career, Strange Travelers. And it came out long after I had been reading his stuff for years and backtracked to a lot of the older stuff to discover, for example, to my surprise, that I had read stories of his long before I had thought, because they had shown up in, again, Dangerous Visions. So then I backtracked further to discover that, he had this oeuvre of older science fiction that was more kind of, this is sort of wrong to say, Heinleinish, because there's no similarity between them as writers, and I mean none. But it's of that era of science fiction where it's about, what it's like to be on a colony on the moon, and it's Wolfe-ish in its depth. And so you go all the way back to, like 1960 and find stories like this. And you're like, wow, came in with this guy, I thought, with the Shadow of the Torturer in the 80s, like a lot of people. And the backtracking is worth it. If you haven't done it, you should. You should go back and read like older stuff of his. I think most of us too picked up a lot of the short story collections that were reissued in the 80s. When the Book of the New Sun really picked up, then all these short story collections appeared, stuff like, the Island of Dr. Death and other stories, and the Fifth Head of Cerberus, and a lot of really trippy shit, that he had written during the 70s. Well, anyway, the Strange Travelers book, though, I'm well into it, about over halfway through the stories. And I remember a fair amount of them from when I read it the first time. But I confess that sometimes later in a writer's career, you pick up, a book of new stories, and you can't fault somebody with as brilliant a career. And in many ways, you can't fault any writer with a long career when you read this pack of new stories. And these were new stories. They were stories mostly written in the 90s. And you kind of go, I've been here before. And again, it's not fair. I mean, it doesn't make them not good stories on their own. And I'm trying to sort of naive myself as I read them, and not be, the dedicated reader of Gene Wolfe going, so how does this story stack up with all those? Oh, that one's a lot like that old, and not do that. And I think I just came to that decision just now talking to you, that because I was slowing down. I was thinking, am I really enjoying this book that much? I mean, these seem kind of familiar-ish. And then I just, in talking to you, just kind of caught myself and said, what on earth are you doing? Are you doing that thing where you're fold your arms and sit back and go, yeah, Kubrick used that same shot back in Paths of Glory, and so in this later one, and the person sitting next to you trying to enjoy the movie is going, shut up. Right. So I think I just got a twinge of that. Thank you for saying that to me. I appreciate that. I'm going to enjoy the rest of this book tremendously because of it. All right, so a nod of remembrance to Wolfe, who was certainly one of the finest writers during his time. I would stack him up against any writer contemporary with him. I mean, just completely. The literary quality, the depth, and the discussability of it all. Remarkable that such a purportedly secular group as science fiction fans would be so dedicated to the content and so dedicated to the themes of a person who was clearly, of a great deal of religious depth on his part. Although my favorite books by him were the Soldier series, Soldier of the Mist and Soldier of Arete. And I know that he really loved them because I spoke to him while he was working on them, and his intensity, his love for what he was doing and learning, because he was a learner. That was one thing about Wolfe. He always learned stuff in order to write a thing. And his passion was so infectious, and I loved the books. And I'm given to understand that they weren't big sellers, and I think that his editor basically said, knock it off, write more of that futuristic, book sun torturer stuff, go do more of that. And he did. And then I don't think that the third one was published, perhaps posthumously. I did some hunting around, and I think the intended third one did in some form come to light. And that is on, my list one of these days in some way, because I've read those first two multiple times and suffered thinking that I would love to know what he had in mind for the conclusion. All right. That's a bit of that literary stuff and a little bit of that sentimental Christmassy stuff, and both of those are good. And what have we to say that's perhaps a little sterner or truthier? Remember, truthy doesn't mean important, right? This could be really trivial, could be no big deal. So don't get all excited, especially if I knew that, or whatever. This may be a repeat, and it may be of no interest. I like to consider when talking to people, because there are times when truthiness has to do with things that you think are wrong. And it's not like last time where there's just kind of a disconnect in values or phrases that don't mean much to you as such. But here it's more like, I really think something's wrong out there. I mean, I cannot fathom how anybody looks at this and looks at it this way, and I see no benefit to doing it. And it's democracy as a noun. A democracy, a culture, or a system, or a country, or whatever, is a democracy, a noun, a state of being for governance. And I don't see it. Much of the time you get the muddying of that water with terms like, true democracy, mature, developed, all sorts of things, which are, of course, dodges, because if one points out and says, well, that country, is a democracy, and but it's not a true one. Stuff like that. So first of all, one can talk about what terms like democratic may mean, and one can talk about the sort of society that any such procedures is supposed to, or is purported to, or is believed to result in. And that's kind of an interesting question. If you have democratic procedures, which, if you look historically, you recognize come in so many flavors and shapes and sizes as to who gets to vote, and when they get to vote, and when is policy voted upon or decided, which isn't quite the same thing, on representation and all sorts of things. I mean, how is this, done? Until you finally come down to it and just say, well, if somebody votes some way in some fashion, then that has, that's where you say that's a democratic fit, because votes are involved. And then that's it. And that's where everybody loses their shit and says, oh, no. That's not good enough. But democracy has to have human rights. Democracy has to have prosperity. Democracy has to have this and that. And then you go, wait a minute, are those things it's supposed to result in, or are those things it's supposed to have because, in order to be a democracy, you have to have those things. And a lot of those things, particularly in terms of a justice system, have really nothing to do with votes at all. So you kind of wonder, what on earth you're talking about if we say that a system in which we have, shall we say, representation via voting, and that has a policy-making role that's demonstrable. It's not just like, two fingers. Okay, if we all vote for dudes and those dudes all decide what to do, then clearly, that's good enough. And so without all of that, we're going to say there's some demonstrable way in which voting results in policy. Apparently, just constant referenda won't do it. There's got to be some kind of system in place. But like I say, shapes, sizes, flavors, something. So the logic seems to be that if that's in place and if it's not a bad one, then we end up with a society in which, awesome. So as you can see, there's this huge underpants gnome component here, voting, ? Democracy as a noun, the democratic society with all these features. And I have yet to come across meaningful evidence that any such state, the democracy, has ever existed. Democratic procedures everywhere, tons. You want to talk about, the American Revolution as some sort of source or representative of it, I'll just laugh in your face. It's been going on for a long time, all over the world in all kinds of ways. And there you go. That's what we have. Democratic procedures scattered around in a wide variety of means and ways and stuff. And this interest in, this belief in either, if you have procedures like that, you get all this good stuff. Or if you have all this good stuff, then and only then can you call it a democracy. You see, you're kind of going both ways in terms of cause. That's always a tip off that you're dealing with cognitive dissonance. And you kind of go, can we just not talk about the democracy? Can we just denounize it? Right? Actually, there's a word for that. We used to teach it in terms of clarity of writing, denominalizing. Whenever you're dealing with actions and descriptions, recognize that to nominalize what you're talking about is fine if you're referring backwards to an action, a verb or an adjective. But to introduce it as a nominalization is this exotic reification that masks a wealth of sins. So anyway, yes, can we denominalize democracy and say what on earth actions and descriptions are we talking about? And then say which ones are causes of something, some kind of society, and which ones have to be in place for that to get those descriptions and verbs stuck in there. So all of this, I'm sure you can apply to present circumstances in a variety of countries very quickly. That's my truth. Denominalize that shit. There isn't one. The fact that you can grammatically make a noun out of it means nothing. Do you care? Is that truth as far as you're concerned? I think so. There are a few of that kind, but I think that one's relevant, which perhaps is more important than capital T truth in a metaphysical sense anyway. Have a nice time. I think there's one more of these if I can make it on Friday and not cheat again for 2020.